Okay, it's the Penn State Blitz. It returns here on PennLive. Greg Pickle, we have a lot to get to
We do.
in this show as well. We got some more Penn State recruits, or signees, I'm sorry, getting on campus to get ready for the fall.
Yep.
We've got to talk about the Big 33 game. We're going to talk about some rule changes, a lot to get to here in mid-June. But before we do that, I just want to remind everyone that you can get all these great Penn State videos produced by PennLive on our YouTube account. You want to go to YouTube/AllPennState, and also, it's kind of important, I've been told by a little birdie that we are 2 subscribers away from 2,000. And I'm here to tell everyone that's listening, the 2,000 subscriber gets to go on a pub crawl in Middletown, with Greg Pickle later this summer.
Yeah.
All expenses paid by Greg. He knows all the bars in Middletown. So the 2,000 subscriber here to our channel is going to be Greg's guest.
Yes.
In Middletown.
Start at the Mansion House.
I don't know where you're going to start.
That's right.
You know the bars like the back of your hand, so that's something to look forward to. All kidding aside, first down here on the Penn State Blitz, Greg, and they still play the Big 33 game. It's not quite what it was 10 or 20 years ago,
right.
But there was definitely a Penn State presence in the most recent game, and there was a kicker who made a 56-yard field goal that kind of came out of the blue, and it just so happens that Penn State's in the market for a place kicker in 2018. What were your impressions from the Big 33 game?
Well, Bob, Vlad Hilling, Hollidaysburg kid. Obviously, when you can kick one from 56 yards, you're doing something right. He'll walk on at Penn State. Will he be a factor? I don't know. You and I remember standing next to you at a spring practice, watching Blake Gillikin, though.
Yeah.
And he was impressive as
yes, he was.
And
the other guys were not.
Right. But you just wonder if James doesn't want him to do all 3 of kickoff, punt, and placement kicks. Is Hilling a guy that could handle kickoffs, while Gillikin, the more experienced veteran guy, handles placement kicks and punts? I think it's certainly in play now. You don't want to forget that Jake Pinniger from Iowa will be on campus soon, but Hilling certainly, as long as he's not hurt, he did take a pretty nasty hit after that field goal was good. He didn't play the rest of the Big 33, but it seems like he's going to be okay. As long as he's healthy, Bob, you have to think he's going to have a chance to be in the competition come the fall.
And you would hope that Jake Pinniger, who's on scholarship, can do some similar things to what we saw in the Big 33 game.
Right.
He was not the only Penn State-bound kid. Jahan Dotson from Nazareth was in that game. Low-scoring game, but he did some nice things as well. Any thoughts about him?
Yeah, I think he's a guy that, you heard comments leading up to the game that the coaching staff for Pennsylvania was very impressed with him and what he's able to offer. I think Penn State knew that. It's why, even though things didn't work out between him and UCLA, Penn State was there waiting at the end and able to snatch him up before signing day. There's no question in my mind that Penn State was just waiting it out, playing a long game, and hoping that, not that they knew that Chip Kelly was going to come to UCLA and decide not to take, the kid from Nazareth, Pennsylvania, but it worked out in the long run. They kept an open line of communication, and they ended up getting a guy that, I don't know if he contributes from day one, but certainly he has the speed to maybe follow in the footsteps of, a KJ Hamler a little bit down the road, or maybe somebody else on the roster that, needed a couple of years and then made a breakout. So we'll see. But he had a nice play on a trick play, next catch rather on a trick play. And then Charlie Catcher, of course, the Cumberland Valley linebacker, blocks a field goal as one of the highlights of the day for Team Pennsylvania on a day that there weren't many of them. So I think it was a good showing for the group overall. Absolutely.
Okay, second down here on the Penn State Blitz. We're going to talk about some rule changes that could impact Penn State this fall. There's 2 of them. Let's start with the freshman rule.
Right.
You're now allowed to play, I believe, up to 4 games this year as a freshman, and then it will not count towards a year of eligibility if that's all you play.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a little bit of management involved. There's a little bit of philosophy involved. When do you play them? How do you play them? Your thoughts on maybe how that will impact what is a very talented Penn State 2018 class. There's a lot of kids that probably could help Penn State, especially maybe on the defensive side of the ball. What do you see with this rule change where James Franklin and Steph, if they want to, could play a freshman for 4 games this year at any time, and then if they don't play again, it's not really counting towards a year of eligibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key, Bob, is that you can play game 1, game 7, game 9, and game 12. It doesn't have to be 4 in a row. It doesn't have to be 4 before September. It can be however you want it. You can wait to the bowl game, play the first time, and be good to go. So, I don't know. You're always going to have the green group that they're going to play no matter what, and the red group is in his stoplight system that green obviously means go, red means you're not playing this year no matter what. The thing I'm curious about is what do they do with the yellow guys? Is it a tryout basis in September when you play opponents that you should pretty much walk over for the most part, at least 3 of the 4 before you get to Ohio State? Is it a situation where, like, maybe a guy like Mike Miranda, for example, who late last year was maybe close to being better than anything? You know, it would have helped Penn State to have him in the lineup, but Penn State didn't want to burn his red shirt, so they held out. I mean, I think that's the question, is how do you manage that group of guys moving forward? Yeah,
and even a couple years ago, Will Fries was the guy, you know, they wanted to play him late in the year when they had those injuries at tackle. James talked about him, but they didn't want to just play him for 2 games and have that count as one of his years, so they wisely, I think, sat him out. To me, I think it's all about, you're right about the green lights. Those are the kids that James and his staff know in August, hey, we want to play these guys, that they can help us, whether it's on special teams or playing in key reserve roles, or maybe even starting or in a timeshare. But I think there's also kids, Greg, that are yellows, and they're kind of on the fence, and we'll see what happens. We'd like to play them, but that's not in the plan. The yellows, if they get better as the year goes on and injuries happen, I think in the second half of the season, I think you could make a strong case for maybe playing them if they're physically and mentally ready. There's also you can almost use as a carrot or reward for playing in the bowl game. Hey, listen, you were great on the practice field this year. We know you're ready to play. You won't play a lot in the bowl game, but at least you're going to get out there and run around, get on national TV. I just think it's a good rule. It's a rule that's a long time coming, and I do think that there's going to be a cluster of yellows that Penn State has that they're probably going to look to play. And also the way the schedule is set up, Greg, later in the year, I mean, they have the early game against Kent State. So that's a prime opportunity to take a look at some kids, whether they're greens or yellows, and maybe for an extended period of time. But also they got Rutgers and Maryland later in the year, and I think there's a pretty good chance that Penn State will be up fairly big in those games, and that's another chance, I think, where you play these kids and it doesn't maybe affect the outcome of the game, but it really helps them for 2018.
Yeah, I think that, you know, just quickly to get into some of the guys this impacts most, I think Judge Culpepper, P.J. Mustafer, maybe you want to play just one of those guys and save the other one, but you have 4 opportunities now to find out whether or not, you know, one of those guys is your guy, or maybe they're both your guy, and they're better than, you know, your depth out there, so you play them both. The same thing goes for tight end. And doesn't it feel like this rule's a couple years late, but may impact? It's a little late for Miles Sanders and the freshman year that he had. But it could do the opposite now for Ricky Slade, where maybe if you're not using him like you thought you were going to, you don't burn his first year on campus.
Yeah, I think about a month into 2016, I think if James Franklin could have maybe pulled Miles back, and then he would be a redshirt sophomore this year, I think that might actually, both sides might have been in favor of that. That's a great point. There's another rule change that recently was adopted involving transfers. Every year Penn State has a kid or two that is either thinking about transferring or doesn't. Corey Bolds this year opted to transfer out of the program. Tommy Stevens thought about transferring. He's not transferring. But the new rule is you could transfer without having like a restricted list. In other words, what do you think of that rule?
Yeah, I think that, you know, Penn State, I don't know if they'll be as impacted as much as others. They don't take in too many transfers, and usually the guys transferring out aren't, you know, they're not playing at Penn State, which means they're probably not going to go to somewhere beside, you know, at Penn State's level and play. Now, it's where it comes into fact is a guy like Tommy Stevens, or typically at your quarterback position, when you have guys that may be able to make the cut, but there's somebody in front of them that's just either a little bit better, a little bit older, and what have you. So I think it's a good rule for the players. I don't know how much it impacts Penn State long term, though.
But and just to be clear, so the rule is so before this rule change or this rule clarification, schools could kind of get in the way of a transfer and say, look, you can't. We'll let you go, but you can't go to these schools. Now schools are no longer moving forward. They're not allowed to say to a kid, we'll sign off on the transfer. You just can't go to X, Y, or Z. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. You have 2 business days as a school to put a kid into what they're going to essentially end up calling a national transfer database, for lack of a better word. And then schools will be able to contact that kid. They'll have their information. Obviously, you know, their film stuff's already out there, but all the things that coaches will need to contact that kid to try to get him to come to their school, they'll have, and the schools have to provide that. And you're right, before you could get in the way of it if you wanted to.
Okay, we're officially at halftime here on the Penn State Blitz. Hopefully there'll be some be some comments and questions after we get to fourth down. We're going to start with third down, however, and we mentioned Jahan Dotson in the Big 33 game. I believe right after that he was up at Penn State, and he's kind of already set up there. A couple of offensive players are now on campus getting ready for the rigors of summer camp. Probably see them at Live for Life, but of the guys that are up there from the 2018 freshman class, who kind of strikes you a little bit as somebody to watch?
Yeah, you know, Dotson obviously is a guy that we'll see if there's anything, you know, he can do to maybe work his way into that yellow group. I think he had the two offensive linemen, Rasheed Walker and Rasheed Walker and Juice Scruggs. Probably not guys that contribute. Both look really good. If you look at the photo that Penn State tweeted out of all 7 of the new guys, I mean, they look really good together. And I think that Penn State has 2 offensive linemen of the future that can probably start for 3 years, if not 4. This year's not that year. So those guys will be obviously working towards something greater down the road. But the one obviously is the one we just talked about, Ricky Slade. And he looks like a guy and should be a guy that can go in and play right away. However, Bob, as we know, sometimes same thing was thought about Miles Sanders. And then as it turned out, it would have probably been better to save him. So we'll see. But he certainly has all the tools to be an impact guy from day one.
Yeah, and it's striking to see that he's just not a very big kid. He's an elusive player, an explosive player. Obviously, his highlight tape at Virginia speaks for itself. The fact that he was a coveted recruit, but you just wonder physically. It'll be interesting. Don't you think it'll be interesting to see how they'll devise a role for him if they give him the green light to play him? He doesn't seem, Greg, like a guy that you want to give the ball to 5 or 6 times on 3rd and 1 when there's 3 linebackers and 4 big linemen in front of him. What do you think his role might be at Penn State?
Yeah, he strikes me as someone that could slide into that Tommy Stevens kind of hybrid role where you might line him up in the backfield and let him catch out of the backfield. You might line him up in the slot or, you know, somewhere other than the backfield and let him do work that way. I think he'll get carries. There's no doubt about it. Is he going to get 10 carries a game? I think probably not. Could he get 10 touches a game? I think that's possible. I mean, I think we've seen, you know, Ricky Ronnie in at least the Fiesta Bowl is pretty creative when it comes to getting guys on the field. So 10 touches later in the year, yeah, I think it's possible. Early on, he's going to have to break in like any true freshman would. But he has a rare combination of speed and physical traits. He might not be the biggest guy, but he has a lot else going for him.
Yeah, and I think you made a great point earlier on the Penn State Blitz that he is a player that Penn State can be extra careful with due to the new rule. After 3 games, if it looks like maybe he needs to get a little bit bigger or faster, or he gets nicked, you know, that does not count. Even if they play him late in the year, middle of the year, to not have to use a year of eligibility when Miles Sanders is there and they have some running backs behind him. I think he would be he's a guy that could really benefit, I think, from this new freshman role.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Bob.
Okay, 4th down here on the Blitz. We talked offensive guys who are now on campus in the 2018 recruiting class. There are now some more defensive guys. I believe we already talked about Charlie Catcher from Cumberland Valley. Looks a little bit bigger. Still probably trying to figure out what his best position is. But of the latest defensive guys now that are on campus for the Penn State football team, getting ready for August and possibly getting ready to play in the fall, who are some guys now that kind of have caught your eye?
Yeah, you look at these 3 that are on campus. You have Jordan Minor, the defensive back from Florida. You have Aeneas Hawkins, the defensive lineman from Cincinnati, who missed all of his senior year due to injury. Now he's just getting back into football shape. Hard to see him contributing just because of that. And then you have Catcher, who I think most assume is going to need a year to get ready to go, Bob. So of this group that just got on campus over the weekend, not sure if you see any of them contribute right away. But Minor's an interesting case because I thought he looked a little bit bigger than what you're led to believe from his photos and his videos at the Blue-White game when they honored all the kids on the field. So I thought that, you know, if there's one guy that maybe could work his way into a special teams role or something more, it could be him, but we'll have to wait and see. Okay,
we're going to go to the questions and comments, but just one more reminder. At the start of this, we were only 2 subscribers away from 2,000 on our Penn State YouTube channel. And just remember, Mr. or Mrs. 2000 gets a pub crawl in Middletown with Greg Pickle. So I think this is a win-win for everyone. I encourage everyone to subscribe to our channel. Greg, questions and comments?
We're ready to go, Bob. First, Kevin's curious, if you had to choose today, who are your starting linebackers?
Ooh, very good question. A good friend of ours, Ross Tucker, is a big fan of Jan Johnson's. I think Ellis Brooks is 1, Cam Brown's 1, and Cole Farmer. I think those are the three. The more interesting question is who's coming out when they go 4-2-5.
Right.
I think Cam Brown will stay on the field along with Go Farmer.
All right, there you go. And I think that obviously the question that'll lead to is how much do you see Micah Parsons at this point in time?
Well, yeah, I mean, they still have to decide. James was very, very, very murky coming out of spring as far as who might be the middle linebacker. He also kind of made it seem that it wasn't set in stone that Micah would stay outside. They could move him back to the middle. I think he works best outside. And I do think he's a guy that if he's healthy and he continues to progress, he's got to be one of the top 6. I just don't know, Greg, that if they're going to keep him outside either to play the weak or the strong side, that he would move past Cam or Cole. He's not going to play over Cole Farmer.
Right.
So if he stays outside, the question is if he's going to start, is he going to play over Cam Brown? I don't know if he can close that gap. But if they're going to play him, he could be, I think, just a great weapon on special teams, whether it's in coverage. And I do think there's definitely a role for an athlete like that because guys are going to get hurt,
right,
and they're going to play 6. So I find it hard to believe he would not be, based on what we saw in the spring, he wouldn't be one of their best 6.
All right, quick recruiting one. Jason's curious about the next commit. I'm going to go with Salim Wormley. He decides in July. He is a 2019 offensive lineman. Now, the one thing I'll say is you could always get a 2020 guy to pop on board before that. But I think at this point in time, he's the next best get for Penn State about a month from now. Let's see what else we got here. Tommy Stevens. Is he a specific red zone kind of play where they have a package for him, or do you think there will be more 2 quarterback sets than what Joe Moorhead did?
I think he is definitely, or let me put it this way, he should definitely be part of the red zone package for sure. The question is, for me, what happens if one of the tight ends doesn't jump up? And I honestly think that considering his body type and considering the size of some of the other tight ends, Tommy can be a de facto more athletic tight end, almost in the Mike Gesicki role.
Yeah.
And I do think that if one of these guys doesn't jump up, you're going to see him. You'll definitely see him in the red zone, but you'll see him like you saw him in the Fiesta Bowl. I just think that he's to the point in his career where he's in his 4th year. I mean, you got to play the hand you're dealt. He's part of their best hand. Right. You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense to me anymore to hold him back. I think you turn him loose, and if he gets hurt, he gets hurt. But at some point, you got to play your best players. And I think not only in the red zone, but between the 20s, he needs to be on the field more often than not.
All right, 2 more. That was a good question. And the next one, you sort of answered it a little bit, but we'll just wrap it up quick. Tight end. Who is the starting tight end? Or is that the case where Tommy Stevens takes 70-80% of the reps and you see a tight end on the field 20% of the time? I don't know. I mean, it's it's hard to say.
I have 2 thoughts. So I don't think it was a coincidence that you saw them treat a player like John Holland with kid gloves in the spring. Every time we were up there, he was not out there. He was not practicing. Did not play in the blue-white game. I think in a perfect world, they're going to give him over all the other guys probably the shot. I think he's the most athletic tight end they have, and I think if he's healthy, I think health has been an issue with him, and they've kind of downplayed it. I know health has been an issue with Nick Bowers. I think he's their preferred guy to be the guy. I know we heard a lot about Danny Dalton. I didn't see enough of him that I thought he was ready for an expanded role. The other thing I'm curious about is, I wonder if James will ever admit that Mike Gesicki was basically a wideout at Penn State. Yeah. I mean, I think they're going to use him as a wideout at Miami, and I think that they are really grooming Zach Kuntz to be. He could talk about blocking. He could talk about him getting bigger. He needs to do that. But I think Zach is really just a big wideout, and I think that he can excel in that role, especially in the red zone. So I'm just curious to see at what point, are there tight ends and are there hybrid tight ends? And I think Kuntz and I think that Mike Gesicki weren't really true tight ends, and that's not a negative on them. I just think they're better at one phase of it, and I think that they're kind of tweeners.
All right. Jim wants to know if anyone will wear number 26 this year on offense. Jonathan Suleman, of course, wears it on defense. I would think probably not. You never know, but
I don't know. Would you want, if you're an offensive player, would you want to wear 26? I don't know. They don't do that much at Penn State where they never give those numbers out again.
Right.
I mean, out of respect, I think you got to wait at least a year to have someone play wearing the number 26 on offense. Look, if they're going to give out number 11 on defense eventually, I just think that as good as Saquon was, I don't think Penn State's in the retiring jerseys business, but If they were, he would be on the short list of the first guys to actually do that.
All right, last one, and it's on the running back front, so it's a good way to finish things up. If Ricky Slade's not the #2 back behind Miles Sanders, who is?
Ooh, you know what? It's
question.
It's going to be mixed and matched. I don't know how they feel about Journey Brown. We've heard forever that Mark Allen is a guy that's dependable and they can count on, but he's kind of built along the lines of Ricky Slade, is he not? So my question is, if you have two backs that know the offense and can do the same things, but one is a lot better, I mean, wouldn't you just go with the youth movement? That's a great question, because I think it was rare to see a running back on the field as much as Saquon was last year. If you look around, you look at Ohio State's in a timeshare with Dobbins and Weber. You look at what Georgia did. They played 3 running backs, and the #3 running back with DeAndre Swift might have been as good or better than the guys that are now in the NFL, and even Alabama. 3 or 4 backs. I just don't know. The one thing Penn State doesn't have to me is a thumper. A guy that's 215, that if it's 3rd and 2, maybe you're better off just giving it to him and he can make a yard if the line's
talking about a fullback? Or?
Yeah. No, I'm just talking about it. Instead of a 1-yard gain, he gets the extra yard, and it's a 2-yard gain, and the fan base doesn't freak out. But I don't know. They have an interesting collection of running backs, but it would seem to me that there's a guy, and I hate to say it, but this is where maybe a guy like Andre Robinson could have helped them this year, because he's built, I think, for between the tackle duty. But Slade and Allen, to me, look like they're a little bit of the same. So I don't know how they're going to handle that. I think that August is going to be quite the audition, I think, for Slade.
All right, Bob, that's all we got this week.
All right, remember about Greg Pickle and the Middletown Bar Tour if you were lucky number 2,000. Hopefully we'll have some news on that front next week. You guys continue to enjoy your summer. We'll be back on the Penn State Blitz.